You're watching.
You're watching.
You're watching.
You're watching
West Hartford.
West Hartford
Community Television.
Community television.
Community Television.
For the community.
For the community.
for the community.
For the community.
For the community. By the community.
By the community.
By the community.
By the community.
For the community. By the community.
And it's a wrap.
How many of you have known or have been a top scholar in high school, in university? Many of those top scholars went on to be teachers, to be educators, to be professors. But how many of them went on to be a president of a university? One such person is Walter Harrison. Walter Harrison became president of the University of Hartford in 1998. And he maintained the position for 19 years until the end of this month. I'm Pat Kazakoff. You're watching Shalom Hartford. Stay with me and we're going to meet this Renaissance man, Walter Harrison. What does a retired president of a university do?
Anything he wants.
And what does that mean? What does he want?
Oh, I don't know. It certainly means doing all the things I haven't been able to do for the past 19 years or for the past 40 years that I've been an educator. I want to read more. I want to write. I don't particularly want to write about what it's like to be a college president. I want to write other things. I want to go to more theater. I love theater and have been involved in that for a lot of my life. And especially to watch baseball games and to enjoy a baseball game from start to finish without having to be interrupted by something else.
So you've written 2 books on baseball already, and you just mentioned that you don't want to write about being a college professor,
No.
and you've written 2 books on baseball.
Yes.
So what would you want to write about?
Well, I certainly want to write some fiction, and completely different than that, I want to get back to writing some scholarly appreciation of baseball and its place in American culture. That's really what I love to do.
Well, you wrote that as a thesis. I think that was one of your...
I did. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on that. I have written a number of other things, including, as far as I know, the first article on Jews in baseball.
Oh, this one I
There are
didn't
now
know.
many things written about Jews in baseball and many books, but I think I was the first to explore why is it that American Jews became so interested in a game of baseball.
And why did they become so interested?
Short version of that answer is it was a way to assimilate. It was a way to prove you were an American. It was physical and in a way that the old culture was very mental and very sedentary. And to be an American was to be out and to be in the outdoors and to be doing something. So baseball became a very attractive thing for Jews as early as the 1880s.
And you had that interest. Why do you think you had that interest? I mean, you're Jewish.
I am Jewish.
Wait, very Jewish? Were you about to say
very
you're
Jewish.
very
I'm
Jewish?
Jewish.
And what is very Jewish
Well, I
about
don't think it means anything. I'm Jewish.
Just in case, just in case.
Yeah, you're either Jewish or you're not Jewish. I'm Jewish. But I grew up in a small town in which there were very few Jewish families. And I can remember from the time we moved there when I was 4.5, a deep-seated anti-Semitism in the town.
How did it express itself?
Well, sometimes I was beaten up.
That's-
Sometimes I just heard people talking about me or about Jews. My last name is Harrison, which is there's a story behind that, but that's a name given by an immigration officer. And so people don't identify me immediately as being Jewish, so they would say all sorts of anti-Semitic remarks about Jews. So I was quite aware from my earliest days that I was an outsider, that I was different. And I think for me, at least, baseball was one of the ways I could prove I wasn't.
Were you a good athlete also?
I'm a mediocre athlete. I try hard. This is probably true of everything I do. One time, a friend of mine met someone who had played on the high school baseball team with me in college, a different college than I went to, a different place. And this person told him where he's from, and my friend said, "Oh, so you must know Walt Harrison." He said, "Good old Walt. He had very little talent, but he had a lot of hustle." So I think that's true of me if you ask me that question, is that true? Jews, I'm not sure. It's certainly true of me, at least as far as athletic ability is concerned. I have to work very hard to master athletics, but for me, baseball was a love, and I was happy to do it.
So you mentioned that you had a lot of hustle by your own admittance.
That's what I think I do. I think that's probably true.
So which of course leads me to the question. You were an expert in America. You did your PhD in American literature and culture, and you're still very interested. You said you want to do scholarly works. But you became not just a professor, which in itself is a major achievement, but you also became a president of a university. Hustle is not enough to become president of a university.
No, I don't think so.
So how did you become president of a, why you?
Well, everybody has a story. There's no specific moment when I said, well, I'm going to become a president.
Did you want to become a president?
No, I wanted to be a scholar of American literature. That's what I wanted to do my whole life. I think it was a pretty good one. I think it was a great teacher, and I really enjoyed teaching and doing research. And so there's a little story behind this. Also, big sports fan, baseball fan, but a sports fan of all sorts. I was teaching at a place called Colorado College, which is a liberal arts college in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I was teaching English. But because I was a sports fan, I went to a lot of sports games. And then, and every morning, a group of us would meet in a little coffee shop on campus and talk about almost anything. Politics, what was happening in the world, culture, scholarship, whatever. We weren't kids at the time, but,
you're young people.
Among that group was a man who was the vice president for development. And one day, our basketball coach, our Colorado College at the time was called an independent in sports. It didn't belong to a conference. And the team had to travel all over the country to find schools like it to play. There aren't very many small colleges in the Rocky Mountain states. And so the coach had to find a schedule, and he scheduled 3 games in Illinois against small colleges he knew nothing about. He just had to schedule these games. Okay? They get there, they lose one game by 20 points. The next day they lost a game by 30 points. The third day they were behind by 40 points. The coach got his second technical foul and was thrown out of the game. He went out, grabbed his team, and told them to come off the court. Small college sports get very little attention from the media until something like that happens, and suddenly this was a major story. College team walks off, what happened to the old college try, all that sort of thing.
The hustle, what happened to the hustle?
Exactly. So the next day we're having coffee together and talking about this, and I said, you didn't handle that right. The president had put together a group of people to examine it. These people came up with a kind of slap on the wrist for the coach. They took a while to do that. I said it needed to be quicker. You had to be more decisive. There should have been a stronger penalty. So more or less, very quickly, what this vice president did was go tell the president, hey, there's this young guy down in the English department who seems to know something about this. Maybe we should give him a job. So a few days later, I'm in my office grading papers. The president and the vice president walk in and said, hey, we hear you have pretty good ideas about how we can handle our public relations, our visibility. Why don't you do it for a year?
How old were you? About?
36.
Oh, so you're right. You were a mature guy.
Yeah, but not an old guy. Instead of doing it for 1 year, I did it for the rest of my career, and I just sort of, to make a long story short, just kept bumping up in responsibility from one thing to another thing to another thing. Almost 30 years ago now, at the University of Michigan as a vice president for external relations. My official title was Vice President of University Relations and Secretary of the University. So I handled our public relations, our government relations, and I was the board secretary, secretary of the Board of Regents. And I did that for 9 years. About 7 years in, we'd changed presidents once. There was a search for a new president. I was employed to sort of go around and pre-interview the finalists or the candidates, and they came back, they chose one for president. And I started thinking to myself, what you do as a vice president is you do some things yourself, but a lot of your time is spent advising somebody else on how to be president. I think it was natural to think, maybe I could do that myself.
You came to that conclusion?
Yes. So a search consultant, in higher education, there are search consultants usually employed by places to find presidents for them, and the search consultant had worked. I chaired a search for a vice president that she had staffed, and she said, hey, there's this place in Hartford, Connecticut that I think you'd be great for. I had gone to Trinity College as an undergraduate, so she knew I knew something about Hartford. Turned out to be I knew a little bit about Hartford a long time ago.
Right.
And they chose me as president. So was it a burning desire when I was a kid? No. When I was a kid, I wanted to play shortstop for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Was it a burning desire when I was a young man?
That
no.
didn't work out.
Yeah, well, no. Didn't
Right.
work out
Didn't work
by
out.
a long stretch.
Didn't work out, right.
Then when I was a young man, I wanted to be a scholar of American literature and a teacher. And this sort of happened by chance that I became an administrator, and I just kept wanting to do more and wanting to do more. The hustle part, back to your initial question. Mm-hmm. I think what I did was always did more than I was expected to do. And that kind of stems from the same thing that might be called hustle in sports. I worked hard, I worked long hours, I tried to do the best I could, and I think that got noticed. And the second thing, and this, the Board of Regents of the University of Hartford was kind enough to have a dinner in my honor. And John Newman, who's very well known here in West Hartford, senior judge on the Second Circuit of the U.S. Court of Appeals, who was on the search committee and many, many years earlier had been chair of the Board of Regents. He was asked to speak, and he said, when I was a candidate, he called people he knew at Michigan and asked about me. And he said what they all told him is, we trust him. So I think those two things, that I worked hard and that I have a kind of personality that people trust, are probably the two reasons.
And they like you.
I think people like me.
Yeah, that's what I hear. You were in a few plays.
Oh, yes,
with the
I
kids.
told you I like theater.
Yeah.
I've acted.
You were president of Hartford Stage
and I was part.
But you work with the kids.
I spend a lot of time with students. What energizes me about being at the University of Hartford, and has energized me since I began in higher education, and what I'm quite worried about missing after I retire, is the energy I get from young people.
Let's talk about the hustle a little bit.
Okay.
There is a preconceived notion that the Jewish people are a hustling people.
Correct.
Because they were all immigrants.
Correct.
Everybody was an immigrant, and they came to this country, they had nothing, and then they had to create something from nothing. Do you have a feeling that that part of your hustle came from that Jewish, let's call it the Jewish mystique?
Yes. There was the 1950s book called What Makes Sammy Run. I don't think it's a perfect book when you read it now. There's a lot of stereotyping in it, but in a sense, I've always seen a little bit of me in that character.
Or Mordechai Richler, Duddy Kravitz, do you see yourself in that?
Yeah, a little bit.
I
don't think many people would see me that way, but I see it inside.
You feel that?
Do I think it? I think you've got it right. I think Jews have always been outsiders, have always been immigrants, always, at least for the past couple of millennia. And therefore they feel this need to do a little more, to work hard. Hustle has sometimes a negative connotation, like I was hustled by him.
We're not using it that way.
I don't mean to be that I'm dishonest about anything, and I think I work as hard as I can, and yes, I do believe that comes from my Judaism, and specifically, to your point about immigrants, it comes from my grandfather, who came here when he was 13 years old as a penniless immigrant from Lithuania, and got a satchel and sold cloth and thread and needles to walking around the hills of West Virginia and Western Virginia, selling them to farmers' wives, and
Shmatas.
Yeah, and went from there.
He was in the shmata business.
Yeah, from there, he went to he saved up his money, he bought a general store, he sold that, he bought a men's clothing store, he sold that, he moved to a more prosperous community, he started a men's clothing store there. There's a story about my grandfather died when I was 2. I never actually, I've seen pictures of him holding me, but I don't have any real memories of him, but there's a story about him that I love. This was in a little steel mill town that I was talking about before in western Pennsylvania. A few Jews, a couple of Jewish merchants, that's about it. He would get up, when the first nice day in the spring, he would go find the new spring straw hats. He'd put a straw hat on, and he'd walk around the streets of Tarentum, is the name of the town, and other people would see him with a straw hat on and say, oh, it's straw hat season, and they'd go buy a straw hat. That's the kind of hustle that, you might call it ingenuity. I don't know what the right word would be. But he
made it happen.
Yes, even though I never really knew him, I see myself in that.
Yeah, you seem to have a lot of respect for that get up and go, that hustle.
I do, yes. And I don't think it necessarily means that you have to be one of these people who's full of nervous energy. I think most people say about me that I'm calm. But I have a kind of drive. That's really what I'm talking about.
So here we're talking about a person who has drive, has hustle, in quotation marks, and has always pushed ahead, sees himself as always working harder than the next guy, and always doing more than the other person. And now you're telling me this person's going to retire and read a book? Somehow I'm having a problem with that.
You sound just like my wife.
I assume that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. I love my wife, but that is exactly what she says. He's never going to retire. He's not going to sit out on the porch and read a book.
Well, it doesn't quite... There's no consistency in this story. So I'm going to ask the question again. What do you want to do when you retire? Like, what do you really want to do?
So here's another thing.
Because you're old enough to want to do things and you have the resources to be able to do them.
What I'm trying to balance is a sense, as I said earlier, that I can do some of the things that bring me pleasure personally with again, I think this is part of the Jewish tradition of tikkun olam, that I want to help the world. I want to repair the world. I want to make this a better world for people to live in. I think that's what I've spent my life trying to do. I don't think I'm going to give that up. I'm on the board of a number of organizations, not-for-profits, who attempt to make the world better in one way or another. I am going to spend time doing that. And perhaps something else comes along that I want to do. I don't particularly want to have to work at a full-time job for a lot of money. I do expect to find something that's going to take a lot of my energy. I would love to help the Hartford community.
You did a lot as president of University of Hartford. There was huge expansion under your regime. You built the Art Center, the Irma and Mort Handel Art Center. Mm-hmm. You also did Renee and Bob Samuels Art School, a Technology Center, the Shaw Center at Hillier. Yeah. Of all the things that you did, what's the one thing that you're most proud of? What's the one achievement that gives you the most pleasure?
Well, I think
you also built the magnet school.
2 magnet schools.
Two magnet schools.
All of those things, all of those kind of capital building projects were important to making the university a sustainable and going institution. But what I'm most proud of is having a hand in, I didn't do this all by myself, creating a caring, welcoming community that loves learning. That's something I found in a way, but it needed a lot of work, and I think I've contributed to that. So if you ask me what's the one thing I'm proud of, it's the community we've built at the University of Hartford.
And how do you judge that? Like, how does one judge that the community is caring? Is there a quantitative judgment? Because a building you can see.
Excellent point. Well, there's a social, so I'm a humanist, you said that. I'm an American literature scholar, and I always say I don't need the data, just tell me how you feel. So what I'm describing almost is a feeling. But if you ask me to quantify this in some way, somewhere like a quarter of our students are Jewish. I don't know the exact number.
That's a lot.
We're not allowed to ask people anymore.
That's a lot.
What's your religion? It is a lot. It's where the last time I looked, we were somewhere like the 7th largest university by percentage of Jews. We have 38% of our students are students of color. About 4% of our students are Muslim. We've got the largest single religion we have is Catholic. So we've got all these people on a campus together, and comparatively...
How many people on the campus? How many kids? How
Well,
many students?
there's 7,000 students, another 1,600 faculty and staff members. There are another 1,000 students in the 2 magnet schools, and maybe another 100 students.
9,700.
So we're up around 10,000 people
right,
every
just
day.
under 10,000.
On a daily basis, 10,000 people, not to mention all the people who take music lessons through the community division of the Hart School, which is another couple thousand people. So there are lots of people on campus of all different types. I'm not saying we're perfect, but we have very little tension between them. And if you ask me, well, how did that happen? What did you do specifically to make that happen? The only thing I can point to is just setting a tone of being welcoming to everyone. And then they picked that up and they carried on themselves.
So from the theory of it stems from the top.
That's what I think. That's what I think the president does, is to set a tone that others follow. How do you set that tone? I think this is the part that most people miss about leadership, is you have to listen carefully, because you can only lead people to what they want to accomplish. So I think I've done it by listening carefully and by helping to put together an atmosphere where people of different sorts, no matter whether it's race, religion, gender, nationality, can come together and live in a cooperative and collegial environment.
What about the Hartford connection?
Second point. So I became president in 1998, as you said, and in January of 1999, I went to Oxford because we have a program with Hartford College in Oxford, and I wanted a chance. I was going to Europe to meet some alumni there, but I also wanted a chance to meet what they call him the principal of that college in Oxford University, and some of the people who ran the program and where our students were studying. I wanted to see all that. And in those days, I ran in the morning. Now I swim in the morning, but I was running in the morning. And I got up and I was running around the town. And in my head, of course, there's a constant kind of chatter in Hartford about the problems of Hartford. There are cities where people are very proud of where they live, and they exude that. And in Hartford, we have this way of worrying about our
Well, there's
town.
when I came here, there seemed to be the complex that you're between New York and Boston.
Yes, I heard that, and I always said to people, if I had wanted to go to Boston or wanted to go to New York, I would have become a president of a university or college there. I wanted to come to Hartford. So at any rate, there's all this concern about Hartford. I got up early in the morning. I'm in Oxford, England, and I'm running around the streets, and I noticed, this is something I knew, but it just made an impression on me, that all of these colleges, which had their foundations, the oldest ones of them as monasteries, they're all built the way a monastery is built, with high walls on the outside to sort of keep the world out. And I thought the University of Hartford was founded by the people of Hartford to be a university for the Hartford community. Instead of figuratively building walls around us, we need to open this up to the community.
Well, Trinity was also built with a wall around it.
Yes, Trinity has a wrought iron fence.
Wrought
around
iron
it.
fence.
Trinity's in a different neighborhood than we. I don't like to criticize my alma mater. I think they have done a lot as well. And when I first came to Hartford, another Jewish president, Evan Dobell, was at Trinity, and he was doing a lot for their community, so I had that stimulus. At Michigan, I had done a lot to help the University of Michigan in the city of Detroit, so I had some experience with this. But it was this run that really gave me the idea to make this a theme of my administration, that we were, from our founding, a private university with a public purpose. So then there's this problem of, there's so many things that you could do in Hartford. How do you narrow it? And I decided to narrow it to the immediate communities closest to the university, the Upper Albany neighborhood and the Blue Hills
Well, that's where you built the Art Center.
That's where the Handel Center
the Handel
is.
Performing Arts Center.
Right. That was a major effort to put a university facility in the middle of these two neighborhoods, and it's literally right on the border. It had been an auto dealership. The Thomas family had closed the Cadillac dealership and moved it up to the North Meadows. So when I came, that was an empty building. I went, one of our regents at the time was a man named Bob Killian, a probate judge in Hartford at the time, and he told me, you should go take a look at this building. And it looked like an abandoned auto dealership. So I go to the building. I'm met by Doug Thomas, and he says, oh, you know, these buildings were built by Alfred Kahn, were designed by Alfred Kahn, the architect. Alfred Kahn was the architect of probably the 10 best-known buildings at the University of Michigan, where I just come from. I said, what? That Alfred Kahn? He
So
said,
that
yes.
spoke to you.
So I
That
said, why
spoke
was
to you.
Alfred Kahn, also Jewish, by the way, but why was Alfred Kahn building auto dealerships? So there's a long story, but he built these big public buildings. The Depression came along. Nobody was hiring people to build public buildings, but the auto industry was expanding. They needed factories. He became very well known for letting natural light into a factory setting.
And ergo,
From that, he got
the
hired.
glass.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
ergo the
right.
glass.
So he had built this auto dealership for Cadillac, for it to be the center of southern New England's Cadillac industry. He built it next to a railroad track because they used to bring half-finished cars in.
I can see that you're a
railroads.
professor.
Yeah, well,
I can
I'm giving
see,
you a lecture.
Yeah, well, I can see that you're a professor, but all
So
this
cut
is
it
leading.
short is what you're saying. So
Well, what I'm saying is this is all leading to
this is perfect. Why not take this building built by an architect I
in
admire,
Hartford.
in the middle of two neighborhoods who need something to be inspired by, and make it a performing arts center. The Hart School needed more space, so long story short, that's what we did.
Well, we've been talking to Walter Harrison. As you can see, he is infused with the hustle, in the good sense. He's created an environment of community that he's most proud of. And I guess, President Harrison, we're not quite sure what you're going to be doing in your retirement. That question wasn't quite answered. However, what we do know is that you're going to do something to better the world, I think.
I hope so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a
Thank you, sir.
pleasure.
Thank you.